Kate LaFalcia. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. We are continuing our Saturday book. This is video number 2 of Final Events by Nick Redfern. I didn't read the subtitle last time. The Secret Government Group on Demonic UFOs and the Afterlife. This story, I'm still working on the book. I'm not quite at the end of it. It's a little scary. I think it's the perfect book for moving towards the end of October. I'll tell you what. I hope you're enjoying it. I think it's very interesting. And let's just continue. Nick Redfern, author, researcher, UFO, journalist. I don't know what exactly I would call him. Expert, would that be the right word? He's been all over television, all the shows, all the UFO shows. He's written books, lots of books. And the last sentence, I hadn't noticed this the first time. There's a little irony here. I wonder if Mr. Redfern has a sense of humor. Now, keep in mind what we're discussing in this book. Nick Redfern lives in Arlington, Texas, and can be contacted at nickredfern.com. Okay, let's get going here. We are on chapter 6. And to summarize, there is a group within military and government across intelligence, probably part of the CIA. Plenty of Freedom of Information Act documents actually support this story now. It's no longer speculative. And for a very long time, starting in the late 40s, early 50s, they've been interested in UFOs because why wouldn't the Air Force? Something up there in the sky, it's national security. But there is a subset of people interested in UFOs who are really biblically oriented, and they believe that ETs are demons and that they have us all fooled. I don't know, like I told you, it's a good thing we're doing this around Halloween. It's kind of scary. So let's just continue here and see what they say. Chapter 6, 1952, Invasion. Now, this special group that's studying this specific occult demonic aspect is the Collins elite. The elite regarded Jack Parsons' death as appropriate, how he left, and inevitable, the fulfillment of his reckless pact with beings. He died because he opened a portal for nightmarish visitors who continue to arrive. ? That was kind of their attitude. And there was a huge increase in UFO sightings right after he did his Babylon working, and again after his death. Is that a coincidence? According to the Collins elite, quote, the timing was frightening. July 19th and 20th, 1952, in Washington, D.C., over federal airspace, there were sightings. U.S. Air Force Major General John Samford said this to the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. Oops, I don't want to lose my place. Okay, so there's aerial objects in federal airspace, always a bit of a concern. And he writes, it's a secret memorandum. We're interested in these reports in that we must always be on the alert for any threat or indication of a threat to the United States. We cannot ignore these reports, but the mild hysteria subsequent to publicity given this subject causes an influx of reports, which since the 19th of July has almost saturated our emergency procedures. What he's saying is, you've gotten people's attention and we're hearing about it from all sides. So these things were sighted by the Washington National Airport, Andrews Air Force Base, and Bolling Air Force Base. Also, they weren't just seen by random hysterics on the ground. They were seen by commercial air pilots. And what was seen? More than 12 UFOs. They were on the radar. They glowed. They were much slower than planes. They didn't act like planes. I mean, planes, still have to obey the laws of Newtonian physics, and these things did not. They didn't follow the normal plane trajectories. They popped in and out of the radar at will. They evaded pursuit planes, F-94s, by just disappearing. Not disappearing, going away, disappearing like 1 minute they're there, the next minute they're gone. The F-94 crew members reported off and on sightings of these things in the sky previous months before this mass sighting. So Redfern in detail provides the dialogue between the control towers, between the Air Force Base and Washington National Airport, communication with fighter pilots, Andrews. J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI, he began investigating right away and wanted to find out, what the Air Force knew. He didn't want to be left out. The Air Force was playing it down publicly, but they told the FBI that the Air Force had no satisfactory answer. Their answer was, we don't know what it is. A guy called Phil Cox, who was an FBI investigator, learned that the Air Force had categorized sightings in general. There was number one, civilians on the ground see something. No credence. Unbelievable. Sighting number two is when a commercial or military pilot sees something. Now, this is more credible because pilots are experienced with things up in the air. And usually because they're vetted for their job, they're not given to imagination. And they were all men, so they weren't hysterical, right? And number three, pilot sightings with radar or ground sightings at the same time, which make up about 3% of sightings, or did at that time. These are the most credible. It's difficult to explain them. And interesting fact, they were occurring globally, not just the United States. And the Air Force intelligence commander by the last name of Boyd went in writing, is quoted as saying, it's not impossible. They may be ships from another planet. So the UFOs from outside the Earth are being treated as a serious possibility by senior U.S. military. This is their first guess at what they could be. And the Collins elite feared, at the same time, they're fearing that Parsons summoned something unholy in 1947, that it actually worked. So I have some questions about that. We'll get to those questions. Chapter 7, Occult Space Brothers. The Collins elite knew that these experiments of Parsons and Crawley were done under the influence of altered states of mind. And just to be clear, for the sake of YouTube, I'm not advocating doing that. The elite concluded that the best way to access UFOs, whatever they were, was not through radar vigilance, not through fighter jets, but through opening the mind to other realms. They thought instead of watching a scope, maybe we should try this. So they began to study how to do that. Now, I have to keep repeating this because I know that I found it a little hard to believe, but apparently there's documentation. The book has all kinds of notes in the back of documentation, things that he got from the Freedom of Information Act, and retired people who've been willing to talk. And these things are verified. The speculation, of course, can't verify speculation, but there are plenty of incidents that happened that are documented, and conversations that were had that are documented, programs that were secretly held, budgetary detours that are now documented. So early in the 1950s, the government and the contactees named Adamski. Now, I thought this was funny. I call these guys the Georges. There was George Adamski, George Williamson, and George Van Tassel. And all the Georges were seeing UFOs. And just by virtue of getting to know them and speaking with them, the elite began to think that these guys had been visited by occult entities and not by creatures from some other planet. So Van Tassel, George Van Tassel, his life was altered one night in 1951. He was lying on the desert floor, as one does randomly with the scorpions and, Anyway, he was lying on the desert floor in Landis, California, and he was meditating. And he claims that his astral body went to a huge flying saucer orbiting the Earth. He said he met with a select body of ETs, the Council of Seven Lights, and they warned him of Earth's wicked and self-destructive ways. This was confirmed by Reverend Robert Short in Arizona, who one night was directed by alien voices to drive to California and meet Van Tassel. They didn't know each other, and Van Tassel wasn't advertising any of this. This is just like a random out of the blue thing. At Van Tassel's home, the Reverend was invited by Van Tassel's wife to watch Van Tassel meditate and contact ETs. They both got messages in altered states, and they got the same messages. They were warned of nuclear war. They were advised about peace and harmony. And they drew the conclusion that meditation was vital to communication. And we all know, meditation is a big feature of many religions, and it's not always, doesn't always look the same. Deep prayer, contemplation, walking a labyrinth, spending time chanting sacred sounds or sacred music. There are a lot of meditation adjacent ways to achieve that same state of consciousness. Van Tassel channeled the voice of ETs in a trance, which means, this is for the sake, I guess, Redfern added this to for the benefit of those who might not be familiar with these terms, that a person in a trance who's channeling is playing host to an entity. It could be an angel, it could be a demon, it could be an ET, it could be somebody dead. You're supposed to be getting wisdom and spiritual comfort is the goal here. The Collins elite saw this whole process as a vile deceit. Let's quote. Van Tassel began publishing a small journal about all these sessions, describing them. And in the first one, okay, this is when they start giving these entities these bizarre origins and names, and I don't know. It gets kind of Star Trek-y for me, but we'll see. One of his alleged alien contacts, Deska of the Fourth Density, urged his followers to remove the binding chains of limit on your minds, throw out the barriers of fear, and dissipate the selfishness of individual desire to attain physical and material things. Now, it's just a little aside on my part. That doesn't sound terribly demonic. In the edition of this journal from December of 53, Van Tassel said that a month previously he got orders from Ashtar, the commandant of Space Station Shar, to contact the Office of the Air Force Intelligence. I bet they love that. At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. Van Tassel passed on the message to the Air Force, and this is the quote: "The present destructive plans formulated for offensive and defensive war are known to us in their entirety. The present trend toward destructive war will not be interfered with by us unless the condition warrants our interference in order to secure the solar system. This is a friendly warning." Yikes. So, was this insanity? Hallucination? Was this aliens? Or they even asked, was this a communist plot? Some locals told the FBI they feared that that Van Tassel was a communist infiltrator. Remember the time period. The FBI investigated, and okay, they claimed that these aliens communicated through telecommunicate, thought communication, thought control, and a lot of our problems were because of our radio frequencies and use of metal. And they were from Venus, not hostile, didn't carry weapons, were not armed. They said there's a field of force located around the spacecraft which protects it. And it left and hasn't been back since, said Van Tassel. So Van Tassel said that the Third World War was coming. It would be large and destructive and biblical. That the ETs were peaceful. It was the humans who were hostile. Then George Adamski, I think that's how it's pronounced, November 20th of 1952, he claimed with 6 others that they all saw a UFO land in the California desert. There's a lot going on in that desert. He talked to the ET pilot, Orthon of Venus, another guy from Venus, in a round disc that had an external staircase, like the kind they had in airplanes. That the ship itself was translucent, and you could see the shadows of other beings on the inside after one came out. The guy that came out, the ET that came out, was 5 feet tall, had long hair. He wore a suit like a U.S. Air Force pilot's jumpsuit. He used sign language and thought to communicate. Adamski wrote a book about it, Flying Saucers Have Landed, with a guy called Desmond Leslie, who, wait for it, was closely connected to Aleister Crowley. And his father's second cousin was Churchill, just for fun. He had been close friends with Tolstoy and had studied with Crowley, studied the occult. And finally, George Williamson had studied the occult as a teen. He got kicked out of the University of Arizona. He helped publish a monthly journal called Valor, put out by an organization called Star Guests, by a guy called Pelly. And Pelly was fresh out of prison for being a conscientious objector. He didn't really commit any crimes. He just didn't want to go to war. But then he became the leader of the Silver Shirts, which was some kind of fascist organization. He got heavily into the occult, and they used Ouija boards. He got Williamson, the occult thing that he was doing, and I'm assuming this was in prison, but I don't know for sure. He got into channeling with the Ouija board. He became a serious chameleon. I don't know, it makes you wonder. He published a book about his ET contact using shortwave radio, Ouija boards, and channeling. And then I summarized it all, big long description, by saying weird ET names talk to him. Then in the late 50s, he changed his identity and completely disappeared. He died in 1986. I don't know if he disappeared, how they knew that he died, but maybe he had original ID on him, and the authorities contacted his family. All three of the Georges claimed the ET contacted them through telepathy, ESP, and Ouija board. All three were investigated by the FBI for possible USSR propaganda work. In 1948, the FBI started getting reports from many sources, and this continued. The ET that were human-like were among us. Like, they didn't look like the Greys. They looked like you and I. That they were communist, and that they used occult and science in order to involve people. The FBI included, this is not aliens. This is Soviet mind control. Now, keep in mind, the Soviets 100% were using remote viewing. So I don't know, what else they might have been up to. The FBI said America has been implanted with brainwashing and trying to contact us to get us to like communism. That it's stage-managed psychological warfare. Sophisticated Russian mind control programs, the Americans believed it was real. They weren't really secret agents. They weren't working for the Russians. They were gullible Americans who believed it was real. This was what the FBI concluded. And the Soviets got their skills from the Nazis. Hitler was really into occult. This is true. Hitler believed some weird belief system called Thule. And it's been a really long time since I read about it, so I'm foggy on it. I should probably do a video about it. Totally into it. They were trying, also they were combining that with science. They were trying to create a weapon called the Bell. They had this secret underground in the caves and then underground armament place, like a factory called Pinamunda. And they made all kinds of experimental weaponry there, including the rocketry they used to attack England during the Blitz. And they used slave labor from the concentration camps to build this gigantic weapon. Now, this is the story. I haven't seen it. I don't know who, if anyone, had ever seen it. Werner von Braun was involved in a lot of this. The head of NASA, original head of NASA. This Bell was some sort of vibratory weapon, acoustic weapon. I don't know. Strange. Anyway, true that the Nazis were into the occult, and the Soviets glommed onto that right away. Remember, at the end of the war, the Americans and the Soviets divided up the Nazi rocket scientists. In 1952, the Pentagon held approximately 8 lectures, not a secret, on ESP and psychological warfare. They really believed it. They did one called Parapsychology and Intelligence with the CIA. In World War II, Hitler was said to rely on astrologers and seers. Suggestions for military applications of ESP continued to be received after World War II. The Department of Defense lectured on the possible use of ESP in warfare. Duke told Redfern that one of the 1952 Pentagon lectures and some follow-ups focused their attention upon the claims of the contactees as they related to receiving messages from what some people on the inside still thought probably were space people. So there's not agreement inside the Department of Defense or intelligence. And they came up with this new theory, and this new theory that the Collins elite had, it led to the discarding of the idea of Soviet mind control involvement, and it was more in keeping with demonology and the demon theory. The Collins elite leaned toward the idea of the demons. They wanted to investigate altered states of mind and ESP. A few still believe that maybe there were beings from other planets physically still here among us. But there was an eventual consensus that they all used mind, no matter who they were using mind-to-mind contact, and that they were evil, deceptively telling people that UFOs are extraterrestrial and benign. Chapter 8, UFOs, Crowley, and Ouija. In the early 50s, 100% true, it is 100% true that elements of the US government were investigating ESP, the Ouija board, and the paranormal. For example, from Unmasking the Enemy by Lieutenant Colonel Dr. N. Pacheco, who was in the US Air Force for 21 years, now retired, and in writing it with Tommy Bland, U.S. Air Force radio intercept analyst. So they wrote this book about ETs and the paranormal. Let's see what they had to say. They wrote that the CIA began infiltrating seances and occult gatherings during the 50s. Planting specialized observers at seances to obtain a broad surveillance of everybody at the meetings. They were surveilling civilians without their knowledge, which is roundly illegal. Where are we here? Okay, so there's a guy called Andrija Puharic, an American of Yugoslavian descent, began to investigate ESP. He founded a laboratory at Glen Cove, Maine, and the Army wanted to talk to him about his research into ESP. He said, a friend of mine, an Army colonel who was the chief of the research section of the Office of the Chief of Psychological Warfare, had dropped in to say hello. He expressed the Office of Psychological Warfare. Did you catch that? He dropped in to say hello. He expressed a rather normal sort of curiosity about my investigations of extrasensory perception and was quite interested in a device which we had been developing in order to increase the power of ESP. The colonel then surprised me by saying that if we found any positive results, to be sure to let him know, as the Army was definitely not disinterested in this kind of work. This was November of 52, he says, before the statistical analysis of the telepathy experiment was completed. The results showed that ESP could be increased in a Faraday cage device, and he enthusiastically brought those results to his friend in the Army. In reality, the Collins elite, the Army, the CIA were sympathetic to all of this and would soon become deeply interested in the subject, trying to determine if ESP and Ouija boards might help to understand the nature of flying saucers. This is Mr. Duke, who's speaking to Redfern. Duke's claims are made all the more significant by the fact in February of 54, the CIA published a 27-page document. This is Freedom of Information Act. It's available. Quote, a history of Ouija and intelligence applications, demonstrating the agency was trying to determine if Ouija boards might be useful tools in the world of espionage. They were early on, when they were first invented, they were called talking boards. They came out of the modern spiritualist movement of the 19th century. They were used to communicate with the spirit world. The first official Ouija board, which many people think is a combination of oui for French, yes, and ja for yes from German. Ouija was made in the 1890s, and the very first one was sold in 1901. Aleister Crowley used one. Jane Wolfe, who lived with him, also did. Charles Jones, who they all call themselves these ridiculous names. Frater Akkad used it to summon angels. He was a pal of Crowley's. Frater means brother. The Collins elite saw a connection with all of this. Desmond Leslie was a co-author with Adamski and was also steeped in Crowley. So they began to believe the contact phenomenon was occult and not extraterrestrial. And this is a quote from researcher and author Brad Steiger. Very often UFO contactees are, by their own admission, individuals who have become disillusioned with the existing religious institutions. Is that implying that they are fertile soil? I don't know. How are we doing for time here? Oh, good. Chapter 9, the main event. The FBI found a group of Parsons fans in Maine doing secret occult stuff. That's that guy in Glen Cove with the name I can't pronounce. And they were surveilled and found to be involved in activities, rituals like Aleister Crowley. The elite made it their business to keep tabs on anyone who associated with Parsons or even acted like him. Within a month, the UFO and the occult activity, within a month of finding UFO and occult activity, the elite feared another attempt to open a portal the way that Parsons had. So these guys are studying the stuff in Maine, and it's making the CIA nervous. So this involved Frances Swan. Oh, it's so funny. I had forgotten I'd read her name earlier, when I was reading. Before I prepared this, I was trying to get farther in the book, and her name comes up again. I had forgotten I'd written it down earlier. So Frances Swan, since May of 54, she claimed that she had contact with ETs via automatic writing. She viewed automatic writing as a tool that is used to contact demonic spirits. It's called dangerous, like the Ouija, by the Bible website. So grain of salt. They believe that you're asking demons to attack you. I think it's important that people understand that you never engage in any sort of metaphysical activity without doing some protective efforts beforehand and making your intent very clear. It's like vampires have to be invited in. Don't invite them in. Let them know you're not welcome. Anyway. She didn't know, this is Frances Swan, she didn't know that her next door neighbor was a board member for the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, NICAP. So this was a nationwide group that studied UFOs. He helped Swan to write a letter to her senator, who passed it on to the FBI, the military, the CIA, and the Collins elite. The implication here in her message is that demons were using Swan to get to the UFO investigators. NICAP was obsessed with interplanetary and the interplanetary theory of UFO activity. They were obsessed that it was physical, three-dimensional guys in the sky in vehicles from other planets. Swan was convinced that she was dealing with the same thing, not demons. Collins elite didn't agree with any of this. The FBI interviewed her, and she alleged communication with 2 spaceships containing 5,000 motherships. So kind of big. She claimed that they were trying to protect us from nukes and wars because those things, that kind of activity, would disrupt the magnetic field around the Earth. The ETs were repairing broken fault lines in the Pacific. I've heard that before. Where did I hear that before? Oh, maybe I read about her somewhere else before. They gave Swan a date, the ETs did, that they would make themselves known to the Office of Naval Intelligence, and they also told her that the Earth would end, as in the Bible, in 1956. So the Office of Naval Intelligence tried to reach them with telepathy, and the elite saw this whole thing as just a big conspiracy to smear the Bible. Swan lived 130 miles from the main home of this guy that I was just saying, I couldn't remember his name, Andrea Puharich, and 75 miles from the place where Crowley-like ritual activities were going on. It was her house, and then the Crowley followers, and then the guy whose name I can't pronounce. So this entire stretch of Maine was involved in Crowley weirdness. Somebody else lived close by that we'll talk about later. That's why her name came up later in the book. Puharich told the elite that he was involved in attempts to communicate telepathically. There was official interest in this, and he got a call in 1957. 2 military officials wanted to visit his lab. One was a general. The visit was canceled by Puharich, and Mr. Duke says it did happen and actually was rescheduled and hidden so that people wouldn't know it had happened because of the fact that they were even contemplating connections between UFOs and Parsons. They didn't want people to know they were studying this connection. No one wanted to openly discuss a link between UFOs and demons and altered states of mind. The Air Force was open to look at this work, but not to let other people know that they were looking at it. There was a record from Project Blue Book and Hynek. Remember Hynek? Early on in the Fantastic Four, what were they called? The group of big shots that began studying this in the early days. And Jacques Vallée. Anyway, there was a record of a secret meeting between all these guys in the CIA office in July of 1959. And Lindahl, the director of the CIA's Photographic Interstation, I think I might have written that wrong, Center, they all got together. These are top brass people. They all got together to talk about Swan's failed experiments to contact ETs. I have a hard time picturing this happening today, but maybe it still is. Not because I am doubting or making fun of, but because of the nature of the people involved. In their second attempt, Francis Swan claims that a flying saucer did show up, so they were actually trying to get contact. Later, it was found that the radar record from the area of the saucer had been blocked out. Not that they forgot to fix the camera. It was working. It just blocked any activity. However, the Navy said that because of the contact, hang on. And just to show you briefly, there are copies of a lot of these documents that have been gotten from Freedom of Information. Now, of course, grain of salt, but nevertheless. So this is the other thing that this report said. The Navy indicates that through these contacts, Mrs. Swan has been able to answer technical questions beyond the level of her education or background. The elite were not only fascinated, but also rather bothered by the fact that some intelligence officials were now being influenced by the saucer people to such an extent that they too were being seduced into entering altered states to contact what might just as well have been demons as extraterrestrials. So what you've got here is just about the time when military officials and some members of intelligence and the government were beginning to take this seriously and think, well, let's try to contact these beings from another planet. Right when that was happening, you had this growing sense of, oh, well, maybe they're demons and they shouldn't toy with them. These guys were not in agreement with each other in any way. So now we're in chapter 10, the Montgomery Affair. January of 1960, Mr. Duke met with Ruth Montgomery. She was a Christian psychic, which is interesting. She wrote the biography of Jeane Dixon. She believed her mission on Earth was to educate the people on Earth about life after death. She was a founder of the Association for Past Life Research and Therapy. She claimed that her books were channeled from spirit guides. She is the one who popularized the theory of walk-ins, which is basically soul replacement, soul swapping midlife. So you're born with a soul, and partway through your life, your soul on a subconscious level. This is not a conscious, you decided in your head and you're aware of it. It happens on a subconscious level, and your soul trades places. Maybe your soul is weary. Maybe your soul feels it's had enough. And this replacement soul volunteers to enter and carry on your life. I know, hard to understand. Dolores Cannon talked a lot about that. She says it's agreed upon on a soul level. Others call it demon possession, disguised. The purpose is to possess people to prepare humans for a paradigm shift and a revelation of the Antichrist. That's what the elite are leaning towards in explaining this. Montgomery wasn't happy about talking with the government, but she warmed up to discuss UFOs and souls and Parsons. She was into that. Mr. Duke told her too much about the main mind experiments that were going on. She revealed it in articles, an article called Spying by Mind Reading that went into the New York Journal of American, the Journal American in June of 1960. J. Edgar Hoover saw it, and he asked 3 of his top agents to go look into it. They replied, the Army is conducting no such project. Well, this didn't mean it hadn't been started, it hadn't been initiated. Lieutenant Colonel Martin had to admit the Air Force did research in telepathy and ESP because of the brainwashing programs that were going on or had gone on in Korea. We already read that. That they did do these experiments with telepathy and ESP, but that they had no luck. And the results were so inconclusive, they felt they were not based in science. But he did qualify that by saying some parts of the mind have not yet been explored. There was another FBI file. Oh, this is no surprise to anybody. In 1957, they claimed that they could teach blind people to see through the use of ESP, teach people to read a paper covered or to see through a wall. The Veterans Association, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence got involved in this, but they were skeptical. And then Ruth Montgomery said the Army Intelligence Service is beginning to delve into an unknown reach of the mind, which, should it eventually prove successful, could make spying the least hazardous branch of defense. The project receives expert guidance within the department, but many of the officers have become so fascinated by the possibility of ESP that they have formed groups outside of office hours to try reading each other's minds. So, converts. Duke said that this was the first time that they were almost caught by the press when all this was going on with Montgomery and she'd spilled beans. In 1961, Duke resigned because he felt that flying discs were watching him and that he and his wife got sick and were getting bad luck and bad health more and more and more. They felt too exposed and affected by whatever was going on. Was it devils? Was it demons? When he quit, he and his wife gradually got better and life came back to normal. Chapter 11, The Arrival of the Kidnappers. The ET abduction controversy is at the heart of the conclusions of the elite. The abductions began in the 60s with Betty and Barney Hill that we know of. The reality, contrary to everything that's said or written or denied publicly, the reality is the government was anyway very interested in the abduction phenomenon. It seems to have stopped, and the assumption is that they accomplished what they set out to do. The whole topic, absurd as it seemed to some people, became known after the incident of Betty and Barney Hill, September 19th, 1961, in New Hampshire. And I was so into this as a kid, I can't even tell you. They went up to celebrate like a belated honeymoon anniversary type of trip to Montreal. And driving home, New Hampshire, in the middle of nowhere, they started seeing a light in the sky. It started following them. They inexplicably had vague notions of pulling over, or maybe there was a roadblock. Maybe somebody told them that the police were telling them to pull over. All very kind of uncertain in their minds. They got home and realized they'd lost a few hours of time. Her dress was ruined. I think they had marks on their bodies. The next morning, they saw marks on their cars, and they started having nightmares and also insomnia and panic attacks. So they sought therapy, and they went to this doctor who began regressive hypnosis, and the story came out. They were abducted into an UFO and subjected to invasive exams. But this was written in a book by John Fowler called The Interrupted Journey. Great book. I covered it ages and ages ago. And then made into a movie in 1975. This was the first time anyone ever described the typical Greys. They described them, but our first real view of them was with Whitley Strieber. So they were described as 3 to 4 feet tall, gray beings with no hair, with weird cat eyes, vestigial facial features. In other words, slit for noses, slit for ears, horizontal slit for a mouth, virtually no chin. So the Collins elite took note that they were now hearing thousands of such similar stories. Mr. Duke introduced Redfern to a guy called Robert Manners. And who was this guy? Not for sure known. Is he a new member of the next generation Collins elite? Was he just a lucky journalist who managed to get an entree into the information? Duke was the last original Collins elite alive, and he was in his 80s. So how did this guy Manners, how did he know what he knew? Redfern began to think that maybe Duke wasn't so retired after all. In 2007, Redfern had a meeting with Manners. They had communicated, I think, before that, but this was their meeting that they had to look into the Air Force files on the Hill abduction. because yes, the Air Force had files on it. The case that got the elite looking at abductions to begin with. How did Manners get the information, but more importantly, how to get permission from the Air Force to share this information? So the day after this event, this encounter, Betty called Pease Air Force Base nearby and made a report. Barney wouldn't talk about them. The Grays, they freaked him out. He thought he might. He thought that the people he told might think he was a crackpot. I think he was a teacher. No, he was a postman. She was a teacher. He worked at the post office, I think. It's been a long, I think I originally read this book when it first came out in the late 60s. So I don't know for sure. Like I said, I did cover it a while back. So they were questioned by a guy called Major Paul Henderson. He was very interested in the craft, the description, and he called the Hills back and asked them, would you be willing to retell your whole story over the phone, understanding somebody was listening and we were recording? And they said yes, but he never called back. The Collins elite were especially interested in this weird trifecta that they saw repeated over and over again. UFO cases with interference with cars, vehicular interference, and at the same time involving young women, and at the same time happening very late at night or early in the morning, dark outside. They also collected reports of very similar encounters from the British Ministry of Defense. And this cooperation with the British was not known by the public until 2007. They kept it very hush-hush. Let's see here what we got going. So I'll tell you the story. It was a little complicated, and I'll see how I can paraphrase it. The experience of a man named Ronald Wildman. Aylesbury, 16th of February, 1962. He requested information on a flying saucer incident. Oh, that's the guy, the official who's reporting. The details of the incident. Mr. Wildman of Luton, a car collection driver, was driving late at night, 3:30 in the morning then, on the 9th of February of 62. He came upon an object like a hovercraft flying approximately 30 feet above the road. As he approached it, he was traveling at 40 miles an hour, but an unknown force slowed him down to 20 miles per hour over a distance of 400 yards. Then the object suddenly flew off. He said it was 40 feet wide, oval in shape, had small portholes around the bottom edge, had a fluorescent glow, but otherwise not illuminated. So he reported this, and the opinion of the local police was this guy was legitimate. He wasn't drunk and he wasn't hallucinating. He was very, very shaken. Genuinely upset. Everybody was convinced that he was genuinely upset by this experience. And similar stories have been shared with the Collins elite from the British Ministry of Defense. Nick Pope, probably. So that's where I'm going to stop. We're at the end of that chapter. And this is the end of video 2. I hope everybody is still interested. It's kind of incredible. It gets a little confusing, all these interwoven connections, but I'll do my best. And I will tell you that Paul Wallace is coming again as a guest. And, you know, his book talks quite a bit about the origins of the human race and biblical stuff, scriptural stuff. And later on in this book, you're going to discover that more and more of that becomes a factor. And so I'm hoping to take him beyond his Eden books and into this area and see what he knows about. I mean, who better than an Anglican deacon to talk about demons? Who better? Okay, so that's it for today. I hope you have a good rest of your weekend. Thank you very much for watching. And hey, no kings. Slán go fóill, sláinte.